Mackenzie Buckler. Our topic is physician-assisted suicide, and we are now open to questions.
Good morning, ladies. Why don't we just start off and you define for us what we're talking about? What is physician-assisted suicide?
So we define physician-assisted suicide as when a physician facilitates a patient's death by providing the necessary means and or information to enable the patient to perform the life-ending act. And an example of that would be the physician provides sleeping pills and information about the lethal dose of that, but the physician still knows that the patient may commit suicide. So
what's the difference between physician-assisted suicide and euthanasia?
Well, euthanasia is like the doctor deliberately injecting something or putting a mask on to kill the patient or quicken their death. And physician-assisted suicide is the patient's decision. They decide whether or not they take the pill or the liquid or whatever it is. And the doctor doesn't facilitate it.
So do you think the desire for the patient to have control over the timing and the circumstances of their death is sufficient reason for somebody to, or maybe for physician-assisted suicide to be legalized in some states?
We all don't think it should be legal. So just because if we have God has a plan for us, and even if you want to have control, it's still suicide, no matter if it's facilitated by the doctor or not.
I think as Christians, there's a lot of evidence in the Bible that says it's against this. So I think as Christians, for example, one of the commandments in the Bible is do not murder, and I think that's one of the foundations of the Bible, the Ten Commandments.
Lily, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, just like they said, I don't agree with it. I do understand why somebody would want to, if you're suffering in pain, you really can't see past that. And I feel like just stuck in this continuous cycle of just being sick and not being able to do much. I can understand why somebody would want to, end it and quicken, get closer to death. But I agree with what Joanna said. I think that it's not up to us to decide if we should live or die. I think that's in God's hands, and I think that He does have a plan for us, and that's
I agree with all of them, and I agree with Lily that I can understand if people are in pain and suffering. I never want anyone to be in pain or to suffer, but at the same time, I think that God can always work miracles, and there's plenty of examples, not even in the Bible, but even today, that show that God can work miracles. And in that, I think that even before we were born, God had our days numbered, and He had it all planned out for us, and that's why I'm against it.
Ladies, this is such a kind of a crossroads subject, right? There's a lot of morality, there's a lot of legal things going on, there's a lot of social norms that are involved here, there's a lot of emotion. Certainly if you or a family member have a terminal illness or are suffering in some way. Talk to me a little bit about the laws regarding this. I know this has been, over probably the last 15, 20 years, has really become quite a focal point. Talk to me about what the legal system says before we get a little deeper into the morality and the other implications of something like this.
So right now, it's legal in 9 U.S. states and D.C. And was first made legal in Oregon, and it's called the Death with Dignity Law in Oregon. But right now, it's legal in D.C., Hawaii, Maine, New Jersey, Oregon, Vermont, and Washington. And it's an option in Montana and California, but it has to be a court decision.
Okay, so a little bit more rigorous process in those two states.
And the trend is that it's increasing in more states, so it's becoming more legal as we go on.
Just this year alone, 3 states legalized.
I was going to say, just following up on those 2 states where they have to have a court decision, are there certain guidelines that have to be met prior to, for instance, do they have to have a terminal diagnosis?
Yes. So going off of that, with the Oregon Death with Dignity, there are many guidelines that you have to go through in order to even begin the process. a physician-assisted suicide, and the first one being you have to have a terminal illness that's going to kill you within the next 6 months.
And you also have to be 18 years old, a resident of that state, and so the 6 months thing. And you have to be able to make a clear-headed decision on taking
Yeah, they,
the pill.
they do a psychological evaluation on you and basically judge if you're capable of making that big of a decision, which is, personally, I think is hard to tell because, like I said earlier, when you are suffering, you can't really see past that suffering and you can't think of anything else outside of that. So I feel like it's a tough call to make.
Who makes that psychological decision?
Doctors.
Is it the treating physician who would be providing the assistance, or is it an outside?
It's
an
outside.
outside one.
Yeah.
Or if that person is provided by the person who's seeking to go through this procedure, or if it's assigned by the state. So do I get to go find my own doctor who analyzes me and says that I am qualified or not qualified? Or is it the state that issues that? Do we know?
I'm pretty sure it's the doctor that's treating you. So if you are in a hospital or being taken care of for a terminal illness, you would request your suicide. by
So it would be in
that
my best interest to find a doctor that was like-minded.
Yeah.
That would help me push this forward through the
Yes.
courses. Mackenzie and I, and Joanna even, you guys made a point that it's increasing in popularity, or at least it's being adopted more in more states. And we see this a lot of times, usually once the first state decides to adopt something,
Yeah.
other states go, wait a minute, they're doing it, should we do it? And then it tends to grow, at least in certain areas of the country. Why do we think that this is becoming increasingly, I don't know if popular is the word, but increasingly available across the country as we're
I
seeing in
think
9 states now?
We see it now a lot more on the media, so that makes people consider it more.
So exposure?
And, yes, exposure to that. And
Yeah, and I think even in, well, I have an example outside of the U.S. In Belgium, there was a patient who was only 24 years old, and they were perfectly healthy physically, but they had a mental illness. But they still let them go through physician-assisted suicide. And I feel like since this is progressing so quickly, like I said before, just in this year alone, 3 states legalized it in the U.S. I feel like it's progressing so quickly that it won't be only physical or mental illness anymore. It can be for smaller things. And there was another example that one patient in the Netherlands was about to go through physician-assisted suicide when they had tinnitus, which is the ringing of the ears, which is very minor, and I believe that this progression is so rapid that it's pretty.
But when you said that's very minor, you're saying it's very minor as somebody who's outside looking in, someone who's young and healthy, and you just can't imagine that kind of annoyance. But if you were constantly having a ringing in your ears, that's going to end up getting you headaches and frustrations. You can't focus on anything because you've always got that. You've got some kind of condition where you can now no longer dress yourself. You can now no longer go to the bathroom by yourself. You can no longer feed yourself. You no longer feel like you're a human being. Can you imagine in that situation why someone might want to say, this is enough? Furthermore, my health care is costing my family a tremendous amount of money. This is a drain on them. I'm done.
In that instance, for myself at least, I could understand why someone would want to take the steps in order to end their life on their own behalf and on their family's behalf. And I obviously can't imagine having any of those things because I am young and I'm extremely healthy and I haven't had to suffer or have pain really in those amounts of that. But at the same time, I think, like we all said before, I think that in the Bible even it talks about how suffering is not always a bad thing, and it can teach us not only to have more faith, but also how to build character. And yeah,
Some examples of these verses are in James and in Romans. I'll just read through them. So in Romans 5:3, it says that rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance. And then James says that count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and when steadfastness has its full effect, they may be perfect, wonderfully lacking anything. Can I go back to your question real
Yes,
quick? So why it's becoming more popular? I think our culture today is so wired towards like, you do what you want, it's your body. You know, I think that I wouldn't say selfish, just so like focus on what we think is best for us. And I really think that just like goes against what God tells us, because like in 1 Corinthians he says, you're not your own, like your body is a temple, and you were bought with a price, so honor God with your bodies. And I think like you know, taking your own life, I feel like that's not honoring God with your body, because he made us, he created us perfectly. And I don't know, I feel like I just feel like it's going against what that is saying. And
Lily, would you say it's a I don't know if it's a selfish decision, but a self-centered decision, at least in that vein?
Does the AMA have guidelines or any moral clauses regarding this issue? The American Medical Association.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes, does the American Medical Association have a moral clause or any guidelines for physicians regarding this topic?
The only thing that we really looked into, and that was the responsibility of the doctors, like in this process. And the majority of what we found was that the only part that the doctor should have in this is basically telling the patient, like, this is the medicine that you can use, giving them access to that, but then leaving the situation and saying that this is your decision and I don't really have any responsibility in this, is mostly what we found on that. So if the doctor were to like push this on a patient or do anything more than give them the information and the access to it, it would be considered euthanasia.
Are you guys familiar with the term Hippocratic Oath?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have anything in your notes? Have you studied a little
Yeah,
bit about
yes.
Hippocratic Oath? Talk to me about that, and then talk to me about that in light of PAS.
I thought something interesting was Adeline's sister is going to be a nurse, and we asked her opinion on it, and she said she was totally for it if she hadn't had to take the Hippocratic Oath, where she says, I will do no harm.
It's a conflict.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she thinks it goes against that. But otherwise, she said, like, with compassion, like her heart would let her do that, but she can't because she's too bad.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the oath says for anybody who's not aware.
so the oath says that first, do not harm, and then it also says that I will neither give a deadly drug to anybody if asked for it, or will I make a suggestion to this effect.
My understanding is that all physicians take that oath as part of their, I guess, graduation from medical school or whatever.
Yes.
That's something that they regularly take. So do we feel like that's in conflict with PAS?
Yeah, and actually, the American Medical Association that you mentioned, their code of medical ethics said that it's fundamentally incompatible with the physician's role as a healer, and it would be difficult or impossible to control, and there's serious risks.
Yeah.
So,
It says like societal risks. So like I think that once we make that fully legal, it'll have a spiraling effect, because where do we draw the line? Like if they just feel depressed, can they do physicians?
Why do you think that's included in the Hippocratic Oath? Why do you think it's important to put that? Is that just something that has been going on for, centuries, and we just thought that's a great thing for them to keep taking? Or is there an importance to having that statement that doctors make in the Hippocratic Oath?
well, I think that like doctors were essentially made to save people, and even from like long time ago, they always tried to help people as much as they could, and now we're trying to end their lives, which I think is pretty contrary.
That's very well said. This is, for me at least, this seems very similar to if a police officer commits a crime and they get arrested. There's usually exacerbating circumstances, right? They get a heavier penalty because they've been trained they've been given special abilities to do a certain job, and they basically use that, for sake of lack of a better term, for the forces of evil, right? Not for good, they've used it for, and I wonder if doctors may have that same indication, right? We've trained you to heal, to make people better, to serve in this way, and now you're using that same to do, in this case, harm, as it says in the Hippocratic Oath.
In the states where it is legal, are doctors allowed to refuse to do it? Like if they say, I took this oath, I think it's a conflict, or because it's legal in that state, are they required to? You know?
We didn't really look that much into it, but from the research that we did, I would say they are allowed to say no if that goes against their moral code. Because if it is legal in the state, there's obviously a lot of other doctors who are willing to do it. So it's not like if this one doctor says no, the patient won't be able to find another doctor who will.
Yeah, they can easily find someone in that state that'll enact that.
In the states where it is approved, did you all look at statistics from when it started to current use? Because you all mentioned that it's growing. Did you all look at growth over a certain period of time, or even maybe a simpler question might be is which state is it most prevalent in? Who has the highest rates?
Oregon has the highest. It was the first one too.
Yeah, because it started there in 1997, and it's still going on today.
And if you think about it, like 1997 wasn't that long ago. And just within that period of time, 9 states legalized it. And 3 of those states were legalized physician suicide only this year. So I think it's only progressing.
Thank you for saying that 1997 was not that long ago.
Would a patient travel to one of these states, or do they have to have an established, like an established pattern of care with a physician?
So there was a girl named Brittany Maynard who lived in California, and at the time, this was pretty recent, I'd say about 5 or so years ago. Yeah, so she suffered from brain tumors, and she had like severe seizures, and she just really had a hard time living like her life. And so, like I said, she lived in California, and she really wanted to do assisted suicide, so she moved up to Oregon where it was legal. And she had to become a resident, so she had to live there for 12 months. But she was able to do it, and she went through with it, and she had her assisted suicide.
I think the main part is you have to be there for 12 months before you can actually go for physician assisted
So
suicide.
is that just in Oregon, or is that consistent with all of the?
I think that's consistent. Yeah, because you have to be a resident of that state in order to do it. So that's the 12-month.
So it keeps people from just going from a state where you can't do it and moving to one that can.
Do you find the laws between the states are pretty consistent, except for the 2 where they have to have the court order? Do you find with the others that the laws are pretty consistent?
For the most part, I think that they all go of Oregon's death with dignity, or at least like the framework of that. So they're all pretty similar.
Is
They
there,
have the same.
is there a minimum age?
18.
And so, Mackenzie, you had mentioned that you kind of feel like it's a spiral effect once we legalize this, and I think that's a really good point. What kind of, so you're speaking specifically to a spiral effect on more assisted suicides happening for maybe less egregious
Yes.
in our heads right now,
Mhm.
illnesses. What does that do to our society if we do legalize it and we do kind of enter that spiral?
I think it pushes the moral barriers because every time, like, if I felt sad or something, I could be like, oh, I want to kill myself, so I'd go to a doctor. But I think it's pushing the moral barriers.
I think in a way it kind of makes suicide seem acceptable, and like it could be a good thing, and which it's not, because it's illegal most everywhere. And I just think it creates that mindset that it's okay to do it.
So you think that by people being in states where it's approved, that, I mean, because honestly, if you have a terminal illness and you feel bad, I mean, do you think it justifies, are people reconciling their minds that because it is approved, it is okay versus like in a state where somebody's terminally ill, they won't take their own life, but if they go somewhere where it's approved, that gives maybe the patient some crazy justification that this is.
I think that it probably would, because especially since it's like a doctor who's giving them, not technically giving it to them, but giving them the access to the medicine, telling them the actual lethal dose of it, I think it gives them more comfort in that this is not, I don't know what the right word